They never announced our marriage, no press release, no gold bands, no flowers, no kiss for the cameras, no witnesses, except Luca, a bleeding priest, and the bodies cooling outside the chapel walls. Andrea slid the ring onto my finger with blood still drying on his knuckles, his voice a whisper that didn't shake. You're mine, always were. Now the world will burn knowing it. We signed no papers, changed no names, but I became Erica Marcarelli the moment he bled for me again, and made it legal in silence. Now everyone who mattered already knew, and everyone who didn't, they'd find out when it was too late to stop us. 3 months later, I stood at the highest window in the Marcarelli estate, watching the garden sway beneath a sheet of rain. Marco was in the north wing, learning the names of weapons I wasn't sure I wanted him to remember. The twins were asleep. One in my arms, one curled in the bassinet beside me. Andrea was gone. Not far. Just deeper into the house. But it still made my skin itch. I'd gotten too used to him being near, too used to the world waiting for another reason to take everything from us again. When I heard the footsteps, I didn't flinch. I just turned. Andrea stepped into the room wearing a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, jaw shadowed and unshaven. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat. His eyes were darker than usual. He'd been in a meeting, and not a pleasant one. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair beside the cradle. I didn't ask, just did. He crouched in front of me, eyes locked on mine. They're coming. I didn't speak. They want the crown, he added. All of it. They think I'm distracted. Because of me? Because of us. He reached for my hand, still bare, except for the ring only he'd ever touched. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. You don't need to be involved in this, he said quietly. You've already given more than anyone ever asked. I looked down at the twins, then up at him. You're wrong, I had said. He stilled. I leaned forward, heart thudding in time with the rain outside. They didn't just try to kill me. They tried to make you weak by hurting me. They thought I was the soft spot in your armor. His jaw tensed. I'm not, I whispered. I'm the blade they forgot to check. He stood slowly, towering, silent, striking. But when he kissed me, it wasn't possessive. It was reverent, like I was the one wearing the crown now, and he liked it. Later that night, I found the file he left open on his desk. Names, photos, histories, men and women who'd stayed quiet during the last war, but were moving now. Not with armies, with silence, bribes, deals, poison. They didn't want to fight him out loud. They wanted to choke the throne slowly. Andrea walked in while I was reading. He didn't hide the fact that he knew I'd see it. He wanted me to. Tell me who dies first, he said. I circled a name in red. He nodded, and left the room. No arguments, no hesitation. Because now he understood. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reigning. The next morning, a convoy arrived at our gates. Not soldiers, not enemies, relatives, extended Marcarelli cousins. The kind who stayed neutral when blood ran in the streets, then crawled back when it dried. They asked to speak to him. Andrea said no, so they asked to speak to me. And that's when I understood exactly what the game was now. They didn't want to challenge the dawn. They wanted to divide the throne. I met them in the courtyard, wearing black, no makeup, no smile. Marco stood beside me, silent still, watching like his father did. I didn't invite them inside, just listened. Things are unsettled, one of them said, a cousin whom I didn't care to remember. He glanced at the guards, the rifles, the shuttered windows. Andrea's enemies are gathering. They think he's distracted. I'm not, I said flatly. They smiled like I was a child. You've given him heirs. That's enough. You should be resting, not influencing. It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Dismissive. Dismissal wasn't a mistake I let men repeat. I didn't answer, just turned to Marco and said, Get your father. Andrea appeared less than 60 seconds later, dressed like war in a tailored suit with his gun still visible under the lapel. He didn't ask what was happening. Didn't wait. Just looked at the cousin. And said, Leave. They tried to protest. That's when I stepped forward. Your presence was a courtesy, I said. One you've wasted. Then, because I needed them to remember, I added, You won't be invited back. They left. Silent, tense, terrified? Maybe. But one thing was certain. The devil had a wife now, and she didn't need his protection, only his partnership. That night, Andrea poured a glass of wine and sat on the edge of our bed. He didn't look at me for a long time. When he did, his expression was unreadable. You were supposed to be the reason I softened, he said. I walked to him slowly, sat on his lap, curled one arm around his neck. I was never here to soften you. No, I brushed my lips against his jaw. I'm the reason you don't shatter. He didn't say a word, just kissed me like the war had already begun. And he was choosing his queen first. The Marcarelli estate used to be a home. Now it breathed like a war machine, every door reinforced, every hall monitored, every shadow checked twice. Our bedroom windows were bulletproof. Our children slept with trained guards stationed at each exit, and Andrea slept with a gun under his pillow, like it was part of him now. The world hadn't ended when I gave birth in chains. It had paused, held its breath, waiting for him to blink, waiting for me to break. We didn't. And now they were crawling from their graves again, quiet, hungry, reckless, like forgetting who we were would protect them. The estate hadn't truly slept in weeks. Neither had I. I moved like a ghost through rooms that once held peace, checking cameras, reviewing gate logs, memorizing escape routes I swore we'd never use again. The staff had changed. Loyal ones only. Every outsider vetted 3 times. Still, something felt off, like the walls were warning me. At sunrise, I stood over Vittoria's crib, watching her chest rise and fall in the half-light. She slept like nothing in the world could touch her. And for now, that was true, because I'd already died once to keep her breathing. I wouldn't hesitate to do it again. But as I turned toward the door, a glint of something metallic caught my eye, tucked in the corner behind the curtain. My blood ran cold. I moved closer. Bent down. A wire. Small. Thin. Placed with intention. I didn't scream. I didn't call Andrea. I crushed it under my heel, slow, deliberate. And then I went hunting. Andrea was in the east wing. Luca beside him, spreadsheets, dossiers, strategy layouts on the wall. They stopped when they saw me. I didn't speak, just dropped the shredded remains of the wire on the table. Andrea stared at it. Luca swore. Andrea looked at me, voice calm. Where? Nursery window. His hands curled into fists so tight I heard the bones crack. Internal? I nodded once. His face didn't change, not visibly, but I felt it. The kill switch behind his eyes being flipped back on. 10 minutes later, the compound was locked down. No one in, no one out. Every hallway re-scanned, every staff member re-interviewed, every weapon counted, even the cooks were interrogated. This wasn't paranoia, it was a purge. By midnight, only one person was missing from the check-in list. A young housemaid, new. Quiet, cleared by Luca twice. Andrea tracked her to the service quarters. Her room was empty. Her tracker, a new standard, disabled. Her comms unit left behind. But her cell phone? Still warm. Andrea held the device in his hand as he turned to me. She got sloppy, or scared. Either way, he said, eyes like frost, she gave us something. The last number she called was local, unregistered, disposable, but traced. And that led to a garage across the city, one we used to own, now held by an independent contractor with ties to 3 rival families, and a contract out on Marco's name. Andrea didn't flinch when he read it. He handed me the file. I read it twice, and then asked, do I make the call? He looked at me like he already knew the answer. You're not the girl who ran anymore, Tesoro. I called the contractor myself. No threats, no screaming, just my voice, cold and quiet. You sent someone for my son. Silence, then. Who is this? I didn't answer. I let the silence burn, then added, I know where you sleep. He laughed. Wrong move. Lady Marcarelli, he said, mocking. Tell your husband he should have stayed soft. I liked him better that way. I hung up, turned to Andrea. Burn it. By dawn, the garage was ash. The contractor's men, those who didn't run, were removed. The contractor himself? Gone. For now, but the message was sent. This wasn't a house anymore. This was a fortress. And I wasn't the hostage in the cage anymore. I was the woman who ordered the fire. 2 days later, Andrea and I sat in the upstairs study watching the sun rise over the outer walls. He hadn't slept, neither had I. But there was no exhaustion, only calculation. They're waiting, he said, waiting for one more mistake. They think the cage broke me. They think the crown weakened me. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us blinked. Then he said it, quiet, like it hurt to admit. I don't trust anyone but you. You shouldn't. If something happens to me, no. You protect them. You protect you. No. His jaw clenched. I'm not planning for if, Andrea, only when, and. You're not allowed to die first. I'm not planning to. I moved closer, brushing my hand over his chest, right over the heartbeat that still felt like war drums. But if you go down, I whispered, I take the throne. His breath caught. Is that a threat? No. I met his eyes. It's a promise. He kissed me hard. No softness, no fear, just fire and teeth and the taste of loyalty. And when we broke apart, he whispered it like a vow. Then we make them bleed first. The first name he ever wrote in blood was his brother's. He never talks about it, never says the words. But I see it sometimes, in the way Andrea stares at the old family ledger like it's a coffin he's already climbed out of once. The book itself is ancient, leather-bound, heavy, frayed around the edges. Inside are names, some crossed out, some circled, some burned through so deeply the paper is missing. He calls it strategy. I call it a graveyard. Andrea keeps the ledger in the war room. No one touches it but him, not even Luca. But this morning, he handed it to me, just offered it across the table, his jaw tight and unreadable. I want you to know what I've chosen, he said. What we've chosen, I corrected. He didn't argue. The names started small, street-level lieutenants, mid-tier dealers, peripheral players who slipped through the cracks when Raffaele fell. But they weren't silent anymore. They were moving, slow and strategic, death by whispers. Their goal wasn't to take the throne by storm. It was to rot it from underneath, cut off loyalty, fracture reputation, seed rumors until the bloodline collapsed from within. Andrea had seen it before. So had I. And now we were going to end it before it started. There were 3 names unmarked, uncrossed, but circled in red ink like a target. Andrea hadn't pulled the trigger on yet. You spared them, I said quietly. His fingers tapped the table. Not spared, saved, for leverage. They wouldn't do the same for you. I don't expect them to. That wasn't the point. Not for him. Andrea didn't act out of mercy. He acted out of positioning. Even a rotten piece on the board could block a stronger move. But I stared at those names, those men who laughed when I was chained and bleeding, who watched as I screamed my daughters into the world, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in months. Rage. You were going to use them, I said, but they used us instead. He met my gaze. You think I'm wrong? No, I said. I think it's time you let me be right. He didn't speak for a long time, didn't move, and then slowly he slid the pen across the table to me. Then write it. I didn't hesitate, didn't blink, didn't care that my hands shook. I took the pen, and I wrote my first name in blood. Not literal, but close enough. The ink was dark, heavy, permanent. When I was done, I looked up. Andrea hadn't taken his eyes off me once. You just sentenced a man to death, he said. I held his gaze. No, I whispered. I sentenced us to peace. That afternoon, the hit was ordered. Quiet, precise, no mess, no chaos. Just one name removed from the board. The other 2? Still circled, still useful. But they knew now. The woman they thought was leverage had become the knife. That night, I stood on the balcony outside our room, staring at the estate wall. It looked the same as it always did, but I could feel it shifting. Andrea came up behind me, hands on my waist. You did well today, he said. I didn't do it for approval. I know. His breath was warm at my neck, his voice low. You did it for the throne. I turned slightly. Do you have a problem with that? His answer wasn't words. It was a kiss, slow and searing. When he finally pulled back, his voice was hoarse. I married the right woman. Later, after the twins were fed and Marco was asleep, we sat side by side in the war room again. 1 glass of wine between us, the ledger still open, 2 names still circled. I pointed to the second. What makes him dangerous? Andrea leaned forward, eyes sharp. He owns silence. Elaborate. He controls a network of whisper channels, blackmail, off-record contracts, loyalty trades. Is he loyal to anyone? To fear, he said, and profit. Then he's not loyal at all. Andrea gave a faint nod. And the third? I asked. Andrea's face shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. He looked away for a beat before answering. She used to be loyal. She? He nodded once. Elena Vitale, former liaison between Marcarelli and Vitale families before the collapse. I narrowed my eyes. Former? She walked away when the war started, said she didn't choose sides. Neutrality isn't loyalty. No, he said softly, but it wasn't betrayal, not then. But now? She's feeding intel to someone. I don't know who. Do you want her dead? He looked at me. Long, quiet, torn. I don't want her dead, he said. Then what do you want? Andrea's hand curled into a fist on the table. I want her to regret choosing the wrong side. I stared at the page. Elena Vitale, a woman who knew his past, who might have once had his trust, maybe even more. And yet he'd circled her name anyway. That meant something. It meant he was letting me decide what she became now. threat, leverage, memory, or enemy. I picked up the pen again. Andrea watched me, silent. But this time, I didn't cross the name out. I didn't circle it either. I just put a question mark beside it and slid the book back to him. "You'll know what she is when the time comes," I said. "And if I don't, then I will." Andrea didn't speak again that night, but when we went to bed, he curled around me like he'd never stop holding on, and just before sleep claimed us both, I heard him whisper it into my skin. "The next name I write," a pause, a breath. "It'll be the last." He was only 4 years old, and already the world whispered his name like a promise or a threat. Marco Marcarelli, Andrea's heir. My son. Not by blood, but by something stronger. By choice. By war. By the night I wrapped his tiny body in a blanket and ran into hell to save him from the men who wanted him dead before he could take his first breath. Now he stood in the south courtyard with a wooden training knife in his hand, feet planted, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Luca watched from a distance, arms crossed, correcting his stance with nothing but a nod. He didn't look like a baby anymore. He looked like a boy becoming something harder, something dangerous. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. He's learning faster than I did. Andrea's voice came from behind me, low and quiet. I didn't turn, just watched our son block a swing and counter, too fast, too clean. "That's not comforting," I said softly. "He needs to know how to survive." "He's 4, Andrea, and death doesn't care." I turned then, my chest tight. "He's a child." Andrea's face didn't change, but I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to be right. "I wasn't ready when my father died," he said. "I thought I was, but I wasn't. I won't let that happen to him." "You think you're going to die?" "I think we've made too many enemies to pretend we're immortal." I stepped closer, lowered my voice. "Then teach him how to live before you teach him how to kill." Andrea looked at me like he wanted to argue, but couldn't. So instead, he reached out and pulled me into his arms, pressing a kiss to the side of my head. "I just want him to have a chance." "So do I whispered. "But I want him to smile, too." We stood like that for a moment, watching Marco disarm a grown man with surprising grace. Then, a crack, a boom. The sky didn't break, the earth didn't shake. But the sound, sharp, mechanical, deliberate, cut through the air like a scream. My blood froze. Luca moved instantly, covering Marco with his body as the guards surged forward. Andrea's arm went rigid around me. "Get inside," he said. But I was already moving. By the time we reached the courtyard, Marco was safe, shaken, but breathing. The smoke was faint, coming from a scorched patch of gravel near the front gates. No explosion. No casualties. Just a device, a message. Andrea crouched beside it, eyes scanning, mouth pressed in a line. "No shrapnel," he said. "No fire, not meant to kill." "Then what?" I asked. He looked up at me. It was meant to scare him. Marco stood between 2 guards, fists clenched, tears in his eyes. But he didn't cry. He just looked at the spot where the bomb had gone off and whispered, "They tried to make me afraid." My heart cracked. Andrea walked over to him, knelt. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. Marco's chin trembled. "I didn't run. I know." Andrea reached for him, rested a hand on his small shoulder. "But it's okay to be scared. Courage isn't not feeling fear. It's choosing to stand anyway." Marco blinked up at him, then nodded once. Strong. Fierce. God help me, he looked just like Andrea. Later that night, the house was silent. The twins were asleep. Marco had been tucked into bed between us, refusing to be alone. Andrea sat in the dark war room with the detonation device on the table. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to fall apart. "Why him?" I asked. "They want the line to break before it begins." "They already tried with me. They failed." Andrea's jaw tightened, and now they know how much it cost them. I walked to him slowly, sat across the table, watched the shadows crawl across his face. "You think this was a warning?" He shook his head. "This was a test, to see if he's still the weakness." Andrea's eyes locked on mine. "But he isn't. Not anymore." I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "You love him," I said. Andrea exhaled. "I never wanted to, but yes, and he loves you." "I know." "So now," I whispered, "we teach him what you never had." Andrea's brows drew together. "What's that?" I smiled faintly. "Hope." The next morning, Marco came to the breakfast table dressed in his usual black shirt and tiny combat boots, but he had something new tucked under his arm. A drawing. He placed it in front of Andrea with a serious expression. It was crude, but clear. A castle, a crown, a small figure with a sword, and 2 babies in his arms. That's me, he said, that protecting them. Andrea didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the paper like it was a map to something he hadn't believed in until now. Will you help me? Marco asked. Andrea's voice was hoarse. With what? With building it, so they don't get hurt again. Andrea reached out and pulled him into his lap, holding him close, burying his face in the boy's hair. And when he looked at me across the table, there were tears in his eyes, but not the broken kind, the changed kind, the kind that said, if they want to break this bloodline, they'll have to go through all of us first. They came at midnight, not with war drums, not with declarations, just silence, steel, and a map they thought was still accurate. But this wasn't the same house anymore, and I wasn't the same woman. I woke to the sound of glass shattering, not loud, not frantic, just precise. One window, north corridor. Andrea was already out of bed, barefoot, shirtless, gun in hand, before I had fully registered the echo. He didn't speak, didn't hesitate, just looked at me and nodded once. Stay. Lock the door. I didn't. The twins were already hidden. Panic protocol had been drilled into every wall, every guard, every breath of this house. Marco was with Luca, tucked behind bulletproof steel in the sub-basement. Andrea moved like a ghost down the hallway, lethal and cold, and I followed 3 paces behind, armed, unshaking. They were already inside. 3 men. Masks, no insignia, no sound. But they made one mistake. They didn't check the mirrors. Andrea caught the first one at the corner. Bullet through the skull. No hesitation. The second turned. Too late. I shot him in the leg. He dropped with a scream. Andrea finished him. The third ran. Big mistake. We didn't chase him. We didn't need to. Our walls don't let people go when they enter uninvited. By sunrise, the house was calm again. Bodies cleared. No one dead on our side. But the message was carved into the floor. A spray of blood leading from the window to the staircase. A red trail to our children. A warning or a promise. Andrea sat in the war room with the last intruder tied to the chair. Blood dripped from his nose. His hands were bound with wire, not rope. His mouth gagged. Andrea waited until I entered before speaking. You know who he is? No, but he knew where to come in, Andrea said. He knew which window was blind. He crouched in front of the man, pulled off the gag. What was the plan? Silence. Andrea didn't blink. Tell me, and I'll make it quick. The man smirked, bloody teeth and bravado. She wasn't supposed to, shoot. He looked at me. You've got a hell of a wife. Andrea smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but like death. Yes, he said, I do. We didn't get a name, but we didn't need one. His tattoo gave him away. Small, behind the ear, old family crest, Baresi, not dead, just pretending. Andrea made one phone call, a code word, a time, a location. No names, no threats, just an invitation to a funeral. The next morning, the staff dressed the estate in black, unusual maybe, for a house that hadn't lost anyone. But that was the point. The message wasn't for us. It was for the ones watching, the ones who still thought they had time. When the Baresi family arrived, they found Andrea waiting at the gates, alone, unarmed, at least visibly. I watched from the balcony, heart pounding, pulse like thunder. 3 cars, 7 men, 1 woman. Andrea opened the gate himself, let them walk in. And then, he pointed to the garden, fresh dirt, 3 headstones, no names. Just space. He looked the oldest Baresi in the eye and said, I've already dug your graves. They tried to laugh, but they didn't make it past the second breath, because that's when the guards stepped out of the shadows. 12 men, guns drawn, and Andrea? He pulled out a lighter, simple, silver, lit it once, let the flame flicker, then dropped it onto a stack of their own family's flags, drenched in gasoline. Fire consumed the cloth in seconds, and then silence. He didn't kill them. Not yet, he let them leave. But he made one thing clear. Next time, there would be no warnings. Later that night, I sat in the nursery with Vittoria asleep in my arms and Alessia curled against my chest. Andrea leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, shirt wrinkled from the fight. They underestimated you again, he said. They always do. You looked down from that balcony like a queen ready to watch a beheading. I smiled faintly. I was hoping for one. He chuckled once, dry and tired, then stepped forward, kissed the top of my head. Give it to you next time. I looked up at him. Why didn't you kill them? His face changed. Not regret, not softness, just calculation. Because war makes noise. I want silence before I burn them. When the house fell quiet, Andrea joined me on the edge of our bed. We didn't sleep, didn't talk, just stared out the window at the 3 graves we hadn't filled, yet. And when I finally whispered, "They think we're bleeding," he answered without looking at me. "Let them." A pause. Then he turned. "I want them to think we're vulnerable." "Why?" "Because it'll make their screams more satisfying when they realize they were wrong." He didn't say another word, but I heard it anyway, in his breath, in his pulse, in the way he pulled me into his arms and held me like the only thing worth saving. This is the last time they touch what's mine, and I believed him. Because the next coffin they dig, it won't be for us. War used to mean bullets. Now it starts with whispers, inheritance claims, legitimacy disputes, documents surfaced from ashes we thought had already been burned. The Baresi family had failed to kill us, so now they wanted to erase us instead. If they couldn't bury our bodies, they'd try to bury the bloodline. It started with a letter, hand-delivered. No signature. Addressed to Erica Marcarelli, consort, not wife. Inside, a forged document with an old seal, claiming Andrea had no legal heir, that his children were illegitimate, that our marriage was never official, that the empire needed a pure successor. And if that successor wasn't born of blood, then it could be taken by someone who was. I read the letter twice. Andrea didn't. He crumpled it without a word, tossed it into the fireplace, and lit it with the same match he used for executions. "They're desperate," he said. "They're organized." Andrea turned to me. "You think this will work?" "I think if it's on paper, someone believes it already has." He paced across the study, jaw tense, shadows carving deep into his face. "They're going after legacy," he muttered. "Not land, not guns, name. And who gave them the idea we'd care?" He stopped, met my eyes. Neither of us said it, but we both knew the answer. Marco. They wanted to delegitimize Marco first, because he wasn't mine by blood, because he was ours by choice, because I'd saved him, claimed him, but not conceived him. Which made him vulnerable, to old rules, to broken traditions, to men who still thought purity was more powerful than loyalty. The next attack wasn't a bomb, it was a whisper campaign through old allies. Family heads once loyal to Andrea were now being offered alternatives. Distant Marcarelli cousins with clean pedigrees and no scandal, willing to marry, willing to negotiate, willing to sit on the throne without blood on their hands. But that's the thing, this crown, it's soaked in blood. And Andrea didn't rise to power by washing his hands of it. He bathed in it. "You have 2 options," Luca said, standing in the war room beside us. "Shut them down quietly, or kill the narrative publicly." Andrea didn't speak. He just looked at me, and waited. He always waits for me now. My voice, my decision, my crown. "Both," I said. "We do both." Andrea nodded once, and then moved. The first step was silence. We located the origin of the forged document, a corrupt notary who had once worked for the Baresi legal team. He disappeared, voluntarily unlikely. The second step was noise. We made a statement, not to the press, not to the streets, to them, a private gathering, 40 allies, no phones, no recordings. Andrea walked in with Marco at his side, hand on his shoulder like a king presenting his prince. I followed with Alessia in my arms and Vittoria clinging to my hand. No words, just presence, and for some presence is enough, but not for all. One man dared to speak. An uncle from the northern branch. Older, bitter, never durous until now, he stood and said, "This child," pointing at Marco, "was not born of her. He's not blood." Andrea didn't move, didn't flinch, just tilted his head. "And yet," he said, "he is my heir." The man kept going. "Bloodlines are power. You can't rewrite that with sentiment." "No," I said, "but you can rewrite them with fire." Andrea took Marco's hand, pulled him closer, and in a voice that silenced the entire room, he said, "He is the boy whose mother died in my bed. He is the child who survived when others tried to end him. He is the reason I buried a kingdom and built another. He is mine, and if you try to take him from me, you'll be buried beside the last man who tried." No one spoke after that, no one stood, and the man who'd opened his mouth didn't return to the north. He never left the estate at all. Later that night, I found Andrea alone in the chapel. Candles flickering. No prayers, just stillness. He sat in the pews staring at the marble altar where no gods had answered him before. "Are you angry?" he asked, voice rough. I sat beside him. "No." "Then what?" "Tired." He nodded. "I spent years preparing for wars. I could see," he said. "This one feels like drowning." I reached for his hand. "I was drowning once, too." He looked at me. "When?" The night I stole your son." Silence. Then he whispered it. "You saved him." "I know." He turned fully to me, cupped my face in both hands. "You saved me. We didn't cry. Not there. Not then." But something old inside him cracked again, and something stronger took its place. By morning, the message had been delivered. Marco stays. The crown holds. The bloodline doesn't end with a signature. And the war? The war was just getting personal again. Because now they knew. If they wanted to rewrite our legacy, they'd have to kill the boy who made us a family. And we were ready to kill them first. They never expected me to survive him. They never expected me to stay. They expected a mistress, a nursemaid, a soft thing that warmed the devil's bed and fled when the fire got too hot. But I didn't flee. I learned to burn. When I walked into the inner chamber of the estate that morning, the heads of 3 allied families were already seated at Andrea's table. Men, twice my age, men who'd bled beside him, men who didn't look at me because they didn't know how to. Until now, I'd always stayed just outside the ring, present but not central, the woman who bore his daughters, who mothered his heir, who almost died for this house. But now I sat beside him, not behind. And when Andrea poured a second glass of wine, he didn't hand it to anyone else. He handed it to me. "You summoned us," one of them said carefully. Andrea didn't answer. He looked at me. I met the man's gaze, calm. I did. There was a pause, a flicker of something uncertain in the room. "She speaks now?" another muttered, half under his breath. Andrea leaned back slowly. "I thought you said you wanted strength in the bloodline," he said. "You didn't specify which blood." The message was clear, and it wasn't just performative. Andrea had always ruled alone, but something had shifted, not in power, in proximity. They hadn't killed me, they hadn't broken me, they hadn't erased our daughter, so now, instead of watching from the edge of his kingdom, I was seated at its heart, and some of them hated it. "You bring a woman to this meeting," the oldest one said, his voice low, "but not Luca?" I didn't let Andrea answer. "He's coordinating a cleanup in Palermo," I said, "where your cousin failed to shut down the pipeline, again." The man stiffened. Andrea smirked. "She notices things," he said like it was a compliment. "You should be grateful." "I'm not ungrateful," the man said carefully. "I'm just surprised." "Don't be," I said. "Well, you'll be seeing a lot more of me." The conversation turned to weapons. Next, shipments rerouted, hands greased. Barisi interference in Port Authority. Andrea let them speak, let them posture, and then interrupted with 3 words, "She has the list." I slid a dossier across the table. Timelines, ports, customs officers bought and paid for by Barisi cousins who'd survived the purge. One man stared at the folder like it might explode. Another turned pale. "You've been tracking this?" one asked, incredulous. "For months," I said. "Since the day they took me." "Why not say anything?" Andrea answered for me. "Because she doesn't speak until she has something worth saying." That silenced the room and shifted something deeper. No longer just Andrea's woman, no longer the girl who ran, no longer the mother in the tower. I wasn't on the chessboard anymore. I was the move. When the men left, Andrea didn't speak right away. He stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the gravel drive like it might crack open. "You were perfect," he said quietly. I stepped up behind him. "I wasn't trying to be perfect." "No," he said, voice thick. "You were trying to be undeniable." He turned, took my face in his hands. "You weren't supposed to rule." "I know, but now you are." "I didn't want this," I whispered. "I didn't either." His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. "But now we're here," I nodded. "And we don't bend." We didn't kiss. Not then. Just stood together, foreheads touching. 2 people who never asked to wear crowns but learned to kill for the right to keep them. That night, the children slept easily. The house was still. And I found myself walking alone through the hall of portraits. The Marcorelli bloodline was painted in oil and dust, shadowed eyes and cruel mouths, power passed down from man to man like a loaded weapon. And at the end, a blank frame. Saved for Andrea. But I paused in front of it, took a pen from the hall table and wrote my name in the corner of the canvas. Small, defiant, permanent, because I was never supposed to rule. But now I do. It started with a whisper. Then a message burned into the side of a delivery truck. "Tomorrow belongs to us." Baresi graffiti. Bright red, sloppy, public. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't smart. It was war. Andrea stood in the courtyard, staring at it like it was already a body. Luca stood beside him, phone pressed to his ear, voice low as he relayed orders. But Andrea didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at the paint dripping down steel like blood that hadn't finished bleeding yet. I stepped up beside him, shielding my eyes from the sun. "They want a reaction," I said. "They'll get one," he answered. "But not the one they think." Andrea finally turned to me. "No. Better." That night, we didn't sleep. No one did. The estate pulsed with movement. Guards rearmed, vehicles checked, safes opened, lists updated. This wasn't panic, it was precision. We weren't preparing for if, we were preparing for when. Andrea sat in the war room with 4 maps spread across the table. Port cities, back routes, safe houses. Luca barked updates from the hall. 2 lieutenants confirmed dead, 3 allies compromised, 1 safe house burned. They'd been planning this longer than we realized, longer than the graffiti, longer than the letter, possibly since the moment our daughter took her first breath. I studied the maps, following the red circles Andrea had drawn in silence. "These are all territory weak points," I said. "They're not trying to conquer," he replied. "They're trying to make us scatter, divide us, dilute us. So tomorrow isn't a throne," I whispered. "It's a void." Andrea nodded once. "They want my heir to inherit ashes." I looked at him then, and the fury in his face wasn't loud. It was cold, calculated, caged, the most dangerous kind. "They don't get tomorrow," he said. "They don't even get tonight." The first retaliation wasn't a bullet. It was a story, a leak. Andrea gave his blessing for one journalist, buried under 3 layers of aliases, to discover an old Baresi smuggling line. The authorities raided it within 12 hours. Arrests, seizures, international headlines. Baresi cousins caught mid-transaction, red-handed and humiliated. The next move, more intimate. Our own men knocked on 27 doors across the city. They didn't kick them in. They didn't fire a single shot. They just said one thing. "He knows what you did." No explanation, no demands, just the fear of being known. And fear spreads faster than blood. But the Baresi family still struck back. Hard. 2 men from Andrea's original inner circle were executed within the week. Messages carved into their skin before they were dumped at the edge of the estate. The past dies with us. Andrea didn't react. He reloaded. He didn't cry. He called in blood markers owed from before I ever knew him. Old allies, one-time enemies, and one ghost, Elena Vitale. I heard the name and froze, not from jealousy, from memory. She'd once held his loyalty, maybe his heart, then disappeared when the war began. But now she returned and walked through our gates like someone resurrected. She was beautiful, not threatening, not submissive, just aware. She walked into the war room, looked at me first, and said, "He trusts you." I didn't blink. "He doesn't have to." Elena nodded once, "Then I do." We didn't fight. We didn't become friends, but we understood one thing. The war for tomorrow couldn't be won by ghosts, only by those still bleeding. That night, Marco stood at the doorway of our room in his pajamas, holding a toy dagger. "Is it safe yet?" he asked. Andrea knelt in front of him. "No," he said, "but we're making it." Marco looked at him, serious, small, unafraid. "Then I'll help." Andrea smiled. "You already are." After he fell asleep between us, curled up with one twin on either side, Andrea whispered against my shoulder. "They'll never take him," I whispered back. "They'll never take us." And somewhere beyond the gates, the war pulsed on. But we didn't break. We didn't bend, because the future wasn't up for negotiation. It was born in blood, and it belonged to us. The morning started with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that's too clean, too measured. Andrea knew it first. I felt it second. Even the children sensed it. Marco asked why the birds weren't singing. Alessia clung to my leg without reason. Vittoria whimpered in her sleep. The air was wrong, too still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Andrea sat at the breakfast table, coffee untouched, phone buzzing once, then not again. "I don't like this," I said. He didn't answer, just tapped the encrypted tablet, pulled up a live security map. One red dot blinked twice, then vanished. "Where was that?" I asked. "Eastern perimeter, south gate." "Was?" He set the tablet down. "They're testing our blind spots again." I didn't have to ask who they was. The Baresi family wasn't just pushing, they were measuring, looking for one crack, one angle of entry. And this time they didn't send a bomb, they sent something colder. The box arrived at noon. No name, no return address. No guard saw who left it. Just a black SUV caught 2 seconds on camera before the feed glitched. Inside the box was velvet. Inside the velvet, a crown, burned, bent, shattered down the middle like a broken tooth. and beside it, a coffin nail. Andrea stared at it without touching. Luca stood by the door, already calling the cleanup team. I just looked at the metal, still streaked with soot, and whispered, "They're making a prophecy." Andrea's eyes snapped to mine. "They think you're dying," I said. "They think the next funeral is yours." Andrea stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and lifted the ruined crown with both hands. His face didn't change, but his voice turned ice. "They buried the wrong king last time." That night, he didn't sleep. He didn't come to bed. He sat in the war room with the crown still on the table, maps laid out, routes drawn, alliances activated. I watched him from the door. He didn't look broken. He looked reborn. The man I met in the beginning, he was fire and fury. But this man was smoke, quiet, suffocating, unstoppable. "They sent it to shake us," I said softly. "It didn't work." "It did," Andrea replied. "I stepped in." "What?" He looked at me then, something dark flickering in his gaze. It reminded me who I am. He stood, walked around the table, held my face in his hands like I was something holy. "They thought the crown was mine," he said, "but I never wanted it. You wear it anyway. For them," he said. "For you. For our son." He let out a breath. "But now they've offered me a coffin." My chest tightened. "And?" Andrea leaned down, lips brushing my ear. "Let them build it." I froze. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. "Let them build it," he repeated. "And when they gather to watch me die—" A pause, a smile that could kill. "I'll bury them in it instead." The next day, Andrea made a move no one expected. He called a summit. Open invitation. Enemies included. No weapons allowed. Neutral ground. A promise of truce, just for one day. Even Luca flinched when he heard it. "They'll think you're desperate," he said. "I want them to. Someone will bring a weapon. I'm counting on it." When he told me he was going alone, I laughed. "No," I said, "you're not." "Erica, I'm not asking." He looked at me. Really looked, and he nodded. "Just once. I knew you'd say that." The summit was held at the Marcarelli ancestral estate, long abandoned, now rebuilt for one purpose, the illusion of peace. I wore black, not for mourning, for warning. Andrea wore gray, neutral, unthreatening, deceptive. 12 families arrived, all seated in a circle of glass and stone, and in the center, Andrea and I stood together, side by side, not king and queen, not Don and consort, just them, the two they couldn't kill. Andrea spoke first, not loud, not demanding, just even. "I received a crown and a coffin this week." No one interrupted. He held up the ruined metal. "It reminded me of 2 things. A pause. 1, you never really knew who I was. 2, you never understood what I'd become if you touched my family again." He turned, nodded at me, and I stepped forward. "They thought I wouldn't survive," I said. "Thought I was just the girl who ran." I looked around the room, slowly, deliberately. "You all wrote me off. I was never meant to rule, never meant to carry his name, never meant to hold his children and survive the war, meant to erase them." I leaned forward just slightly. "But I did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was fear, recognition, realization. Then someone stood. Baresi blood, young, cocky, stupid. He pulled a blade from his coat. "Then die with him." But he didn't reach me, because Marco was in the rafters, Andrea's order, a final test, a contingency. And when the blade came down, Marco fired. The man dropped, chest bleeding, dead before he hit the floor. 12 heads turned. 12 mouths gaped. Andrea didn't blink. "He's 4, he said. "And already more man than any of you." We left before they could recover. No more speeches. No more warnings. Just blood on the marble and silence in our wake. Back at the estate, I held Marco tight. He didn't cry. But I did. Not from fear, from the knowledge that this was the world we'd built, one where a child saved his mother in a room full of men who would have killed her. Andrea came to me that night with a simple truth. "I don't want the crown." I looked at him. "What do you want?" His voice was quiet. "Peace." I took his hand, held it against my chest. "Then let's finish it." Because the war wasn't over, but the end had finally begun. Power doesn't ask for your name. It takes it. And the longer you sit on the throne, the more of yourself it demands. Andrea knew this. He'd always known. But he never said it out loud, until the night I found him alone in the chapel again, staring at a cracked portrait of his father. The man who built the house, built the empire, then let it rot from the inside out. "He died thinking he was invincible," Andrea murmured. I stood beside him in the candlelight, arms folded over my chest. "And you don't?" His mouth twitched. "No," he said. "I die a little more every time they make me choose between peace and blood." He looked at me, then lower, at my stomach, flat now, but still bearing the weight of our war-born daughter. You should have run again. I reached up, touched the line of his jaw. I did. Straight into your fire. We didn't speak for a while, not about the plans, not about the next strike. Just silence. The kind that's only safe when it belongs to two people who've already bled for each other. The next morning, we sat in the war room. No guards, no Luca, just the two of us, and one sheet of paper. It held 12 names, the final council of power beneath the Marcarelli crown, some loyal, some not. Andrea stared at them like ghosts. These are the last ones left, he said. To kill? To choose. I sat beside him, legs folded, bare feet against the cold tile. What happens if they all say no? He looked up. Then we burn it all. We didn't speak of the children, not then, but the truth hovered between us anyway. If we won, they'd inherit a crown born in blood. If we lost, they'd bury us both. The first to arrive was loyal. He knelt, spoke an oath, offered his house, his weapons, his sons. The second did the same. The third hesitated, but kissed my hand and said, she made him stronger. And then the fourth didn't come at all. Luca called from the gate. He's fled, took his family, all assets frozen, but he's moving toward Baresi territory. Andrea's voice was like steel. Let him think we don't care. Luca hesitated. You don't want him brought in? No, Andrea said. I want him watched. That night, I sat at the edge of our bed, robes slipping off one shoulder, candlelight flickering across my skin. Andrea walked in slow, shirt unbuttoned, blood still drying on his cuff. He didn't speak. He just knelt in front of me, head lowered, hands on my thighs. I killed a man today, he whispered. One who once held me when I was a boy. My throat tightened. I'm sorry. He looked up at me. I'm not. We didn't touch, didn't kiss, just sat in the quiet space between forgiveness and necessity, because this throne, it wasn't made for love, but somehow we found it anyway. The next morning word arrived. Baresi was assembling in Palermo. Not covert, not subtle. An open challenge. Final positioning. Andrea stood in front of the map, hands behind his back, eyes cold. Tomorrow. Luca blinked. You want to move that fast? She's waited long enough. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I felt it anyway. That night, I wrote letters. 3. One for Marco, one for each of the twins. I didn't tell Andrea, just sealed them, labeled them, tucked them into the safe with my wedding ring, the one I still didn't wear. Not yet. In the hours before dawn, Andrea came to me in the nursery. I was already awake, sitting in the rocking chair, Alessia in my arms. She won't remember this war, I said. He crouched beside me, but she'll know who won it. When we rose, we dressed in black. Not mourning, preparation, no speeches, no ritual, just war, and the unspoken promise that one of us, maybe both, might not come back. In the convoy, Andrea reached for my hand, held it tight, not like goodbye, like a vow. We take the throne, he said. I nodded. Together. He didn't smile, but his grip never loosened. As Palermo's gates came into view, I saw the outline of the old Baresi villa, fortified and arrogant, but even kings bleed. And tonight we weren't coming to negotiate, we were coming to end it. The first shot wasn't ours. It came from the second floor of the Baresi villa, shattering the front windshield of our lead vehicle. Andrea didn't flinch. He opened the door, stepped out into open air, and walked. Not fast, not hidden, like the bullet had only confirmed what he already knew. This was the end. Not of him, of them. Luca covered him from the right, 2 men flanked his left. But Andrea didn't need protection. He was the weapon. The gate groaned open, mechanical and slow, revealing a courtyard stained with history, ours and theirs. Baresi men waited, armed, postured, desperate. They thought he was coming to talk. They were wrong. I exited the SUV seconds later. Not dressed for war, dressed like a queen. Black coat, black gloves, my hair twisted into a knot too sharp to unravel. No blood on me yet, but I felt it coming. Andrea looked back once. We didn't speak, just a glance. He was the king coming to reclaim his kingdom. I was the devil's woman coming to burn it. Baresi stood at the top of the stairs, not the cousin who ordered my kidnapping, not the man who watched my daughter be born in chains. They were dead already. This one was worse. He smiled. I see you brought your ghost, he said, nodding toward me. Andrea's voice cut like a blade. Say her name again. The man chuckled. She shouldn't even be alive. That's the problem with your family, I said, stepping forward. You think survival is a mistake. Baresi's face shifted. Andrea didn't wait for another insult. He drew his gun and fired. point blank, right into the marble at the man's feet. The shot wasn't meant to kill. It was a promise. The next one would be earned. "Where are the children?" Baresi asked, his tone too casual, too cruel. He wanted to shake us, unsettle us. Andrea didn't answer. I did. "Safe," I said. "Far from this place, far from your reach." Baresi clicked his tongue. "Please." What a shame. I always wondered if the second one would be louder than the first. Andrea moved so fast, I didn't see the punch coming, just the aftermath. Baresi sprawled on the marble, blood leaking from his mouth. The guards lifted their weapons. Luca lifted his. Andrea didn't need to lift anything. They all froze. "You want to make a claim?" Andrea asked coldly. "You want to wear a crown made of my name, my blood, my dead?" He walked forward, every step a threat. "Then take it." No one moved. Take it. The silence was deafening, and in that pause, something shifted. Not fear. Power. His. Ours. Undeniable. "I am not my father," Andrea said. "I don't rule from fear. I rule because no one else deserves to." He turned to me, held out his hand. I took it, walked beside him to the stairs. He stepped up first, but it was me who turned back to face the court. "You thought killing us would end this," I said. "But we were reborn in fire, and now?" I glanced down at the men still armed, still unsure. "You'll either kneel to this house," I looked at Andrea, "or be buried beneath it." They didn't kneel immediately. They didn't need to. We didn't come for ceremony. We came for control. And control had already shifted. They just hadn't realized it yet. It was Luca who made the first move. He walked forward, looked each Baresi man in the eye, and said one name, Marco. The child they tried to erase. The boy born of grief and war. The heir who lived. "He's already smarter than half of you," Luca said, "and twice as loyal." Then he looked at us. "And he's ready." Baresi's men began to lower their weapons, one by one, not because they trusted us, but because they knew. It was over. The war was done, and the kingdom belonged to the devil's family now. Andrea didn't smile. He turned, walked up the last stair, and stepped into the Baresi house like it was his birthright. I followed, and as the doors closed behind us, I whispered, "They'll still come. I know. We still have enemies. I hope so." He looked at me. Finally, eyes soft in a way I didn't know a man like him could carry, because that means we still have something worth protecting. We stood in the heart of the enemy's home and didn't feel fear, because we'd already survived worse. We'd survived death, survived betrayal, survived each other. Now, we ruled. The kingdom was his, but the fire, that was mine. It didn't end with a gunshot, or a crown, or a name carved into a door. It ended with breath, a laugh, a morning that came without blood. 3 days after we walked out of the Baresi stronghold, Andrea laid the broken crown at the altar of the old Marcarelli chapel. He didn't fix it. He didn't melt it down. He left it shattered, exactly as it was sent to us, a reminder that the kingdom we fought for wasn't made of gold or title. It was made of us. "I thought I'd die with this name," he said softly, standing beside me. "You still might." His mouth curved, but not today. The twins ran through the halls like nothing had changed. Marco followed behind them, too serious, too grown, pretending not to smile when Sophia shrieked with joy over something invisible. I stood at the edge of the garden, hands tucked into my coat, watching them under morning sun that didn't feel borrowed anymore, just earned. Andrea joined me after a moment. "They'll never know how close it came." I looked at him. "They don't need to. Because this was the ending they tried to steal from us. The one we weren't supposed to get, the one I never believed we'd live to see. But somehow, we did." Andrea took my hand, his thumb brushing the old scar on my wrist, the one left from the chain they used to restrain me before our daughter was born. "You once told me you ran straight into the fire." "I did." "You're still burning." I smiled. "So are you." Later that afternoon we gathered the council. Not just the Marcarelli loyalists, the remaining Baresi men too. Not as enemies, not even as allies, as witnesses. Andrea stood at the head of the long table. I stood beside him. Luca passed out sealed documents, and when Andrea spoke, it was with a voice the room would remember for the rest of their lives. "I built this empire on blood," he said, "but I refuse to bury my son in it." He turned to Marco, who stood straighter under the weight of his father's gaze. "This name, Marcarelli, does not die today, but it changes, because the future does not belong to ghosts. It belongs to the living." Gasps rippled through the room when Andrea stepped back and let Marco sit in his chair. 10 years old, Uncrowned, unproven, but ready. He'll learn from me, Andrea said. From Luca, from her. He looked at me when he said it. Not like I was support, like I was sovereign. We left the room without waiting for applause. The power wasn't in ceremony anymore. It was in legacy, in choice. And for the first time in years, Andrea chose life over death. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I stood at the window in our room, watching the candlelight flicker across the courtyard. Andrea wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. Did we win? I asked. No. My brows pulled in. He kissed my neck softly. We didn't win. We survived. That's better. I turned in his arms, looked up into the face that once terrified me. The face I now knew better than my own. I never asked for this, I whispered. I know. But I'd choose it again. He touched my face like I was breakable, even now, even after everything. I'd lose it all for you, he said. But you didn't, I replied. He smiled. No, I didn't. We didn't sleep right away. We made love slow, desperate, silent, not like the end, like a beginning. And when it was over, he curled around me the way he only did in the darkest hours, his heartbeat steady against my back. Tomorrow, he whispered, you wake as my wife. I froze. He kissed my shoulder. Legally, publicly, completely. My voice caught. You never said, I was always going to marry you, Gatina. I just didn't want to do it until I was worthy. Tears burned behind my eyes. And now? I asked. He kissed my temple. Now I know. You were the crown. I was just trying to catch up. The ceremony was small, private. The twins threw rose petals. Marco walked me down the aisle. Andrea didn't wear black. He wore white. For once. Not as a symbol of innocence, but of rebirth, of what we built together, of what we refused to let die. No empire is without cost, no bloodline without ghosts. But our family didn't live in the shadows anymore. We lived in the after, the peace we carved with our own hands, the home we defended with teeth and fire. And when I laid my head against Andrea's chest that night, listening to the quiet rise and fall of his breath, I thought about the woman I used to be, the nurse, the thief, the fugitive. The girl who stole his son and ran for her life. She didn't die. She evolved into a queen, into a mother, into the woman who stood beside a devil and called it love. Not because he changed, but because I did. They say legacy is what you leave behind, but they were wrong. Legacy is what wakes you in the middle of the night, crying from a dream you can't remember. Legacy is what looks you in the eye and says, was it worth it? Legacy is alive. And in my case, it has Andrea's eyes. My stubbornness, and a fire that no crown will ever tame. Marco turned 17 this week. He's taller than Andrea now, just barely, but walks like his father. Talks like me when he's angry. The boy I raised in hiding, the child I risked everything to save, is gone. In his place stands a man, not yet king, but no longer just heir. Andrea took him to Sicily last year for 3 weeks, training, alliances, a lesson in fear and respect. Marco came back quieter, sharper. He doesn't laugh as easily now, but when he wraps his arms around me, I still feel the little boy who once asked if it was safe to come home. Sophia turned 15 last month. She wears combat boots with her school uniform and keeps a blade hidden in her boot like it's just another pencil. Andrea pretends not to notice, but I've caught him watching her spar with Luca in the courtyard, pride simmering beneath the fear he'll never admit to. She's too smart, too fearless, and far too much like the woman he married. She'll never sit quietly, never kneel. She's the future of this house in ways Marco isn't, not because of blood, because of fire. And then there's Vittoria, also 15, born in chains, birthed under threat, raised in peace. She's the softest of the three, but that makes her the most dangerous because she doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't flinch, she just knows. Andrea says she's the one he fears most, and I believe him. Because that little girl watched the world try to kill her before she took her first breath. And she smiled anyway. They don't know everything. Not yet, but they've read the files. They've asked the questions, and Andrea doesn't lie. Not anymore. Not to them, because we didn't survive all of this just to pretend it didn't happen. Some nights, Andrea still walks the grounds like the ghosts never left. I'll find him in the chapel, lighting candles for enemies he didn't want to kill but had to. He doesn't cry. Not for them. Not even for the men who died with his name on their lips. But once, he cried for me. After our first real fight, years ago before the peace held, when I told him I hated what this life might make of our children. He sat in silence for hours. Then came to me, eyes red, voice quiet. "I don't want them to become me," he whispered. I took his hand. "They won't," I said. "They'll become us." Now I watch them grow into people who were never meant to exist. Children born of war, raised in fire, forged in love, the impossible kind, the kind they tried to destroy. We've been married almost a decade now. I still don't wear the ring every day. Sometimes it rests on the bedside table, next to a knife and a journal with too many blacked-out pages. But Andrea never asks me to wear it. He just wears his, like it's fused to his skin. Luca retired 2 years ago. He still visits, still drinks too much wine, and spoils the kids with stories that are only half true. The other half? Too bloody for bedtime. Andrea doesn't run the way he used to. Not because he's softer, but because he doesn't have to. The world bends for him now. Not out of fear, out of respect, out of memory. Out of the unshakable truth that he didn't just survive the war, he won it. And then chose to build something softer in its place. Sometimes I think about the girl I was, the one who ran with a baby and nothing else, the one who lied, who stole, who broke every rule she swore she believed in. She was terrified. But she kept going, because she had no choice, because she knew if she stopped, she'd die. I don't miss her, but I honor her, because she got me here, to this, to him, to them. And maybe that's what legacy really is, not just what you leave behind, but what you build while you're still here. When I walk through the garden now, I can hear laughter, not gunfire, not screaming, just laughter. From the children we created, the kingdom we protected, the family that lived. And sometimes, when Andrea wraps his arms around me from behind and kisses my neck, when Marco smirks like he's already 10 steps ahead, when Sophia knocks a guard on his butt just to prove she can, when Vittoria curls up beside me with her nose in a book thicker than my arm, I remember what it cost, what it nearly destroyed. And I smile anyway, because in the end, they didn't break us. They crowned us. They survived the fire, they built a family in the ashes, and when the world tried to erase them, they gave it a kingdom instead. Thank you for listening to the Devil's Heir series. If you loved this story, don't forget to subscribe. The next war is coming.